Part 2 of my top 25 favorite Ren and Stimpy episodes. And this time, and as always, it's the final 10. So let's get this started. At number 10, we have Untamed World, which is the debut episode of the nature show that Ren and Stimpy would host that would feature a lot of weird creatures. And with this debut episode, it featured a lot of weird creatures, and it was also featured in the main episode Lair of the Lummox, and even after Hermit Wren, in which, well, obviously in Lair of the Lummox they took a look at lummoxes, and with Stimpy he takes a look at senior citizens. And with this debut episode, like I said, it basically took Ren and Stimpy into a lost continent in which there are several animals that look like them. For example, there are crocodiles that are modeled after Stimpy, with the mating cry of happy, happy, joy, joy. And there are lizards that are modeled after Ren, and almost any other creature is basically modeled after the two of them. So this is a very creative and just very out there episode, and one that is still so much fun to watch, mostly because we get to see all of these wonderful and weird creatures, and the biggest highlight for me is definitely the Croco Stimpy, or Stimpy Dial. Yeah, the Stimpy Dial, who says happy, happy, joy, joy as his mating call. And even in the end before the credits, I mean, we see the Stimpy Dial, like, on Stimpy, also saying happy, happy, joy, joy. And I thought it was a very sweet moment with the both of them. And that's pretty much it for this episode. It's just a lot of fun, and it just really was really creative with its execution. At number 9, we have a tie between Stimpy's Big Day and The Big Shot. Now, I put these two together because they're basically part of a continuing story. It basically starts off like this. Stimpy watches a lot of television. Ren is constantly citing Stimpy that television will rot his brain and will make him seem like more stupid, and, well, there's something that happens, and it's the Muddy Mud Skipper show that Stimpy's excited for. And then we get tuned into a commercial where the spokesman talks about Gritty Kitty, which is a special type of kitty litter, and that Stimpy decides to, well, mail why he loves Gritty Kitty so much, and then the next day, when he mails it, despite Ren, like, totally not being okay with the idea, he ends up winning, and Ren, seeing this as a huge opportunity, well, pretends that he's the cat as well, but ultimately, the agents, the producers, directors end up taking Stimpy, and what do you know, he ends up being an actor. Not just any actor, but he ends up being the talk of television, the talk of Hollywood, the talk of almost any media, aside from being the spokesman for Gritty Kitty, in which there's one memorable scene in which we see Mr. Horse, who is an anthropomorphic horse, being interviewed by Stimpy, and while trying out which kitty litter was better. With the brand name, he says that he still manages to smell the stench. But with Gritty Kitty, it's absolutely, well, negated. The stench is negated. And that makes him really pleased with the product. Not to mention, there is also one scene that Stimpy ends up being the apple of a couple of girls' eyes, and one of them was voiced by, you guessed it, Cheryl Chase. So, if you would have guessed, Cheryl Chase, aside from being a regular in Rugrats, was also a regular in the Ren and Stimpy show, as you would have seen or even heard in a lot of the log commercials, or even a lot of episodes that she was in, usually voicing some older women and at times younger girls. So she ends up voicing a young woman who ends up fawning over Stimpy. And while all that is happening, Ren is at home. Well, he hasn't cleaned the house in what has to be months. And, well, part of him misses Stimpy, even though he refuses to admit it. And every time he switches the channel, Stimpy comes on. And, well, then we get a scene with Stimpy and his childhood idol, Muddy Mudskipper, who is sort of like a parody of a lot of the jaded and world-weary comedians that present themselves as fun and happy-go-lucky on screen, but behind the scenes you see that they're a completely different person, and they're much more callous than that, or even they're much more, well, hurt on the inside, for lack of a better word. So they have a sort of Yogi Bear skit with Muddy Mudskipper as Ranger Smith and Stimpy as Yogi Bear. So once Muddy Mudskipper says his lines, Stimpy then proceeds to make up other lines from other shows. Like, he says one line from Popeye. He says another from different cartoons that are also from Hanna-Barbera, and even the likes of Mr. Jinx and Pixie and Dixie. So those are definitely brilliant homages to those other cartoons as well, which is also kind of obvious because I also start to suspect that John Kay is also a huge fan of a lot of the older cartoons, and even a lot of the people behind Ren and Stimpy, and you could clearly see the influence that this show had thanks to all of the old cartoons of the past, and it's really injected right there. However, Stimpy is not completely happy as he misses Ren. So, Stimpy goes home and says Ren that he's given the money, well, either to charity or to people who needed a lot more than him. And Ren gets furious and, well, slaps the shit out of Stimpy. So overall, well, as the first episode after the pilot, this was definitely a great introduction to the weird happenings of what this show has to give us. Not to mention, this does show a lot of typical, like, rises and falls to fame and all those type of things. And sure, with Stimpy, he could have ended up keeping the money in order to support Ren and himself in terms of their livelihoods. But I don't know, maybe it could have also improved their livelihoods a lot better instead of just living in such a dingy house and then making them have to go through and hop through several job offers in order for them to survive. So overall, this was definitely another first episode that was very well executed and just very well done, and one that I could still look back on in terms of the references that it had to offer, especially with the likes of Yogi Bear and a lot of other classic cartoons being thrown in the mix. Then number 8 to 6. Now these are episodes that are featured in the Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy quote-unquote TV shows. So let's start off with number 8. At number 8, we have Space Madness, the very first episode to feature Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy, aka Ren and Stimpy in space. So it starts off really mildly. We see that, well, Commander Hoek, aka Ren, and Cadet Stimpy, aka Stimpy, are in space, and they've started exploring everything that's around them. But, on the other hand, well, they've been up there in those big, huge galaxies for several years, and even several months, which causes Ren to lose touch of reality, especially when he takes a bath, and pictures a bar of soap as a chocolate bar. And, well, poor Stimpy has to try to contend with Ren's slipping mind, and then when Stimpy is also tempted to press the button, well, he is faced with a tough decision, and then, out of nowhere, the narrator comes in, the flesh and blood, just to taunt Stimpy to push the button, especially like flapping his ass on Stimpy's head in order for him to push it, even treating him like a rolling pin, and doing a lot of other bodily things to him so that Stimpy might end up pressing the button. Stimpy loses it, and then he presses the button, everyone vanishes, and then even the Ren and Stimpy logo ends up vanishing out of thin air. So overall, this is definitely a great first episode of what we can expect with the space adventures of Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy. It was very interesting and, well, very much a great opener, especially considering that even though the ending was kind of bittersweet, I'd have to say it was a good impression. And then we get to number 7, which is Marooned, in which we have Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy end up in some maroon planet, hence the title. So they're trying to find some life there and trying to find their own means to survive. And, well, let's just say that a lot of hijinks ensue, especially when Stimpy ends up serving Ren some cabbage, only to have that head of cabbage end up eating Ren's head, and then Ren proceeds to slap Stimpy very slowly. And then they're under attack by some beast, and then they end up being eaten. Well, the premise of this episode, I have to say, did have a lot more stakes for them in terms of how they have to battle against nature, and I really enjoyed every single moment of it. Yes, it's also another downer ending, but it still manages to really make me tune in to what's going to happen to Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy. So, yet another exciting episode between the both of them. And then number 6, this is the final entry for the Cadet Stimpy and Commander Hoek episodes, especially from Season 1. And that is Black Hole. Now, if you thought that Cherry, the belly button elf, was pretty weird, and especially with the likes of Hermit Wren, then this was pretty much the episode that really preceded it, as we see Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy being sucked into the black hole, only to find themselves in a parallel universe where everything is so topsy-turvy. And among all the Commander Hoek and Cadet Stimpy episodes, this one really has to be my favorite. This has a lot of screwed up imagery. You got baseballs flying everywhere. You got human toenails. You got human toes or fingers wherever. You even have a human being's skin in which Ren sits on, but oops, their bodies are slowly dematerializing, which then leads them to form into different shapes and different types of weird creatures and even different types of other things that may not really seem like they should be in this world. They turned into a lot of grotesque things, and even Stimpy gets turned into a dog at one point. And then when they're about to take a bus to Jersey City, Ren tries to give the bus driver a dollar bill. Unfortunately, it's only exact change that's allowed, and then Stimpy has a better idea that he has a device that can make them, implode, which means that their body parts will end up shrinking and then they'll be gone. Only to find out from Ren that, oh goodness, Stimpy actually had change in his pocket. Why the hell did that have to come out of there, and why the hell didn't they show it to the bus driver? I'll never know, but still, what happens to them? They end up being shrunk until they end up disappearing. And then we see the Ren and Stimpy logo with Ren and Stimpy without their eyes. So overall, out of all the space adventure episodes, this one has to be my personal favorite because, well, if you look at it, there's a lot of screwed up imagery, a lot of what the hell imagery, and even the constant metamorphosis that Ren and Stimpy go through is just really creative and just very interesting. It really shows that the people behind the show really know how to let their brains in and just really go all out with this madness. And this episode really does show it magnificently. Number 5, we have Sven Hoek. And this is basically infamous for one tiny moment in this episode. So this basically starts off, well, mildly, with Stimpy being his usual self and Ren chiding Stimpy that he is stupid. And then we get to see, well, Ren reminiscing those times that he and Sven had in the past when they were both little puppies or newborn puppies. And then there's a ring on the door, and then it's Sven. But the thing about Sven is that he's a lot like Stimpy in terms of his body frame and even in terms of his mannerisms. The only difference is that he's a Chihuahua just like Ren. So Ren is not just surprised by it, but he's also very irritated by the fact that his cousin acts like such a Nimrod just like Stimpy. And, well, even then, Sven and Stimpy start to become very fast friends and even enjoy each other's company. Especially the fact that Sven has, like, a jar of his spit. And I thought to myself, what the hell, man? Well, this also leads, well, Ren to state that he's going to work and that he expects the house to be chaos-free. But, well, let's just say with Sven's and Stimpy's ears, it's just one in one ear and then out in the other. So they continue to make asses of themselves and even, like, play a lot of weird games and even go into Stimpy's kitty litter where they pretend that they're in a circus. And even Stimpy has a break the fourth wall moment with the viewers. And that means us. That it's a private moment between the both of them. And they get treated into one game, which is Don't Whiz on the Electric Fence, with a very catchy jingle. And, well, they start playing with it, but once Ren comes home, he is absolutely pissed. Especially considering that the entire house is dirty, especially coming from the mess that Sven and Stimpy made. But that's not the only thing that they've done. They've covered Ren's opera collection LPs in bubblegum, which really freaks him out. And even more, rare incurable diseases end up going on the loose because of them. And that's not the worst part for Ren, especially when it came to the dinosaur droppings being painted like Easter eggs. Oh my gosh. And then Ren starts wailing it on Sven and Stimpy, thus leading into the most infamous scene in this episode. Ren's little breakdown monologue / rant. You'd have to watch it for yourself in order to understand what I mean. But in the uncut version, he states that he's not only going to tear their lips out, but he's also going to gouge Sven's and Stimpy's eyes out, and even more. Well, basically what Ren wants to do with them is that he's going to inflict a lot of bodily torture upon them, and even rain his own vengeance upon Sven and Stimpy, but not before he takes a whiz until he sees that game. So, well, Ren, completely losing it, decides to whiz on the electric fence, and what do you know? Ren, Sven, and Stimpy end up in hell. My gosh, was this episode really twisted. You know, interesting thing, when I was a kid, I used to not like this episode so much because of how Ren was just so mean to Stimpy and Sven. But nowadays I kinda think that it actually kinda grew on me. The fact that we get to see Ren completely snap at them and think about torturing them is, well, may sound psychotic, but the way that the music portrays itself out, especially with those creepy tones, just makes it seem like one of the scariest scenes and pretty much one of the most what the hell moments in Ren and Stimpy. But still, I can't help but feel rather engrossed because, well, the animation at least manages to convey that, especially with how Ren is so messed up in the moment. Not to mention all the creepy sound effects that manage to be played in this scene just shows just how much of a what the hell scene this really is. So overall, Sven Hoek is definitely known for this what the hell moment, and I can't help but really like it. Number 4, we have a tie between Robin Hoek and the Littlest Giant, which are basically part of Stimpy's Storyland tales. Now, Robin Hoek was the first Storyland tale that Stimpy told, which had Ren in the starring role of Robin Hood and Stimpy as the Merry Men and Maid Marian, known in this story as Maid Moron. It starts off like an adventure story, and especially when it comes to a lot of hijinks. I mean, shooting a watermelon up the air and a chicken, and especially have the sheriff be from Texas rather than, well, from Nottingham. It's actually kind of funny and really kind of just leaves a huge smile on my face. I mean, it definitely is a very fun parody of Robin Hood, and this is why I really love Robin Hood so much. And just when Ren thought that it was just a dream, he ends up seeing Maid Moron herself, and it was no dream after all. So it was definitely a huge what the hell moment there. And then we have The Littlest Giant, which is basically a very, very sweet tale of friendship and basically a tale that has left me with such a warm, fuzzy feeling in my heart. Stimpy plays the titular character. He's constantly being teased for his size, and he can't take this teasing and pressure anymore. It's not until that he meets a peasant boy by the name of Wee Ren, and they become fast friends. And that's pretty much the premise of The Littlest Giant. And they manage to stay fast friends until, well, forever, despite the fact that they've gone on some very, well, challenging trials and tribulations. They still manage to stay fast friends. So overall, these are definitely fun little stories from Stimpy's Storyland Tales, which I could have wished could have been his own show, just like what the Rugrats did with the couple of fairy tales. I really wish that this could have been spun off into its own show, because it would have been fun seeing all the creators like have Ren and Stimpy parody a lot of fairy tales as well, especially the ones that I grew up with. It would have been really fun to see Ren and Stimpy also parodying the likes of Rapunzel or Rumpelstiltskin, Snow White, a lot of the Grimm Brothers fairy tales, and even that of the Charles Perrault fairy tales, or even that of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, almost like a Fractured Fairy Tales, almost like a Fractured Fairy Tales like show just for them. It would have been almost like Fractured Fairy Tales, but it probably would have been fun to really see how they would have told the story. So overall, I really do feel a very sweet feeling and with these stories, and they have a lot of charm to it as well, which is why I really love both of them just the same. At number 3, we have Stimpy's Fan Club, in which there is another messed up scene that can be found right here in this episode. So, Ren is basically a president of Stimpy's Fan Club because Stimpy is pretty much the most popular character of Ren and Stimpy, and he's also one of the most well-loved characters of all time. So, Ren feels like he is being upstaged by Stimpy's constant antics, and every time people see Ren, they just don't really like him that much compared to Stimpy. And even though Ren is okay with his position as president of Stimpy's fan club, he just can't take it, and this ultimately causes him to pretty much snap, and especially when it comes to his tirade once Stimpy is sleeping. And this is by far my most favorite what the hell moment in Ren and Stimpy. You have a close-up of Ren's droopy eyes, and he starts monologuing of how he hates his job as president of his fan club, and he thinks that it's nothing more than just a joke. And he starts even thinking about killing Stimpy. And the way that he mentions something about his hands, like he feels like they're dirty, and he says that his hands can control the fate of millions. The animation in this episode just goes all out, especially with the part that says, "My hands will control the fate of millions," especially that voice change. It just leaves me so scared and just leaves me like have a lot of chills behind my spine, and especially when Ren's brain is almost about to explode, and this whole monologue ends with just like a creak through the door. It's just so eerie, and it almost feels kind of uncalled for, but still, I thought it was a very well done scene, as it has a lot of tension built up through it. And not to mention, this monologue that Ren does reminds me of that of Lady Macbeth. You know, the monologue that she's done in which she imagines herself sleepwalking and wanting to, like, wash all that blood off her hands. The one that starts with, "Out, out, damned spot," and she states that neither the perfumes of Arabia can wash this tiny little hand. And, well, that's pretty much Ren as Lady Macbeth, and he's basically having a Lady Macbeth moment in this episode. So this episode, for its creepy imagery of Ren's Lady Macbeth monologue, was very well done and almost came out of left field for probably a lot of viewers as well. But it's still a very well done thriller, especially when it came to that scene. At number 2, we have a tie between Son of Stimpy and Nurse Stimpy. So let's just start off with Nurse Stimpy. Ren is ill, and it's up to Stimpy to take care of him. So he has a lot of these concoctions in order for Ren to feel a lot better. And Stimpy works the very bone to make sure that Ren is cured of his diseases. And then Ren starts to feel a lot better, but poor Stimpy ends up sick, and then the tables completely turn. I thought this was a very fun episode, and it was just very enjoyable, and especially to see poor Stimpy really working himself to the bone in order for Ren to feel a lot better. With Son of Stimpy, this has to be one of my most favorite episodes as well, because, well, even though this talks about, Stimpy's fart as well, because the original title is called Stimpy's First Fart, I thought it was really charming in its own twisted little way. And what makes it charming is that you really see Stimpy really care for his quote-unquote son, Stinky, and every time that Stimpy ends up saying, "I don't care," with that change of voice that doesn't have that flair and that jovial nature, you really know that he starts to become rather sad. And, most of all, this is pretty much an unorthodox Christmas special that the show offered. This is basically this show's, quote-unquote Christmas special. Yes, it doesn't have Santa Claus, but it has, pretty much almost the entire episode set in winter, which we can presume is December. And not to mention, we hear Christmas songs like Silent Night and We Wish You a Merry Christmas, especially sung by Ren and many others. Not to mention, we even get to listen to Bella Mia Fiamma, in which Stimpy ends up mourning for the loss of his quote-unquote son, Stinky. He constantly searches for him, and then even Stinky is searching for Stimpy as well. Stinky and Stimpy are reunited for the holidays, but then Stinky says that he can't stay with Stimpy any longer, as he now has a fiancée in the form of a fish head. And then they get married. So overall, we have one episode that is quite sentimental in a very weird way, and then you have one that was just a lot of fun at just seeing how far Stimpy can go to take care of Ren. So these are definitely great episodes, and with Son of Stimpy, you can definitely watch it in the holidays or any time in the season as well. So it's definitely a must-watch, and it's also one of my favorite Nicktoon holiday specials of all time. It's not as great as Hey Arnold's Christmas special, Arnold's Christmas, or even as totally fun like, well, Babies in Toyland and the Santa Experience, or even well-meaning like an Even Steven holiday special, but it's still a lot of fun. It can be very heartwarming. So, what's the number one episode on this list? Well, it's pretty much the fan favorite to a lot of people, and one that has introduced this very addictive song to the masses, especially to a lot of Ren and Stimpy fans as well. And that is Stimpy's Invention, the number one favorite Ren and Stimpy episode, at least in my opinion. This starts out with Stimpy, fixing up a lot of these confounded inventions until he has conjured up an idea for Ren. Make the Happy Helmet, in which we see the animation working itself really well to see Stimpy create this helmet. Then when he shows it to Ren, they start singing this most addictive song in the show, Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy, sung by Stinky Whizzleteats. But then Ren starts to feel fed up with this helmet and then smashes it, strangles Stimpy, and tells him that he's angry, but he's never felt so happy before. So overall, this was definitely the best Ren and Stimpy episode that I've ever seen, and pretty much a fan favorite as well. And that is why it is number one on my list for the top 25 favorite Ren and Stimpy episodes. And that's all for this countdown. I'd also like to hear your favorite episodes of Ren and Stimpy as well. Comment below and let me know. And until then, this is Antoni signing off, and stay tuned for a little tribute video that I like to give for Ren and Stimpy. See you later, everybody.